Good morning, I'm Dr. Maureen Nixon of South University. This presentation is an abbreviated version of the paper, Feuerstein, a case study in moral leadership through moral intelligence, and is presented without its references, which can be found in the full paper. When Gardner's multiple intelligences made their way into the lexicon of psychology and leadership theory, they covered the gamut from the familiar cognitive intelligence to interpsychic capabilities and personal intelligences that would coincide with emotional intelligence and later social intelligence. While these intelligences helped individuals gain new perspectives about leadership and how to become better leaders, there has been little discussion of a type of intelligence that would guide leaders to make moral decisions. The necessity of a study of moral leadership is telling in organizational life today. From the often discussed Enrons and Madoffs of the world to everyday situations such as poor lending practices and bank loans or dealing with harassment on the job, leaders are increasingly faced with sharp contrast in ethical choices. Looking ahead into prospects for more ethical leaders to emerge, because of a recent emphasis on ethics in MBA programs, it was unsettling to find that 56% of MBA students surveyed acknowledged cheating, the highest percentage among various majors in the study. As more emphasis is placed upon ethics and leadership, it seems imperative that moral intelligence be added to the list of necessary intelligences for leaders and that role models be identified who exemplify moral leadership, those who lead by example. Moral intelligence is not just important to effective leadership, it is also the central intelligence for all humans. It's because moral intelligence directs our other forms of intelligence to do something worthwhile. The purpose of this paper was to explore the literature regarding moral intelligence in leadership to discover areas of consistency in universal moral concepts. Then the moral themes developed from the literature review of moral intelligence were applied to a case study of Feuerstein, owner of Malden Mills. To determine the alignment of Feuerstein with the values of moral intelligence when faced with an organizational crisis that unfolded over a decade. What is moral leadership? What differentiates leaders who have moral intelligence from ethical leadership or the concept of business ethics? Business ethics are divided into three perspectives according to DeGeorge. Business ethics as an academic field, business ethics as a corporate movement, and business ethics focusing upon the moral or ethical actions of individuals. Many business persons are strongly influenced by their religious beliefs and the ethical norms that they have been taught as part of their religion, and apply these norms in their business activities. Keeping the focus on the individual, Marquez used the term awakened leaders to refer to leaders who lead from the heart and soul, and are leaders who have faced issues that challenged their morals and caused them to determine how to align their principles with their actions. Ethical leadership springs from transformational leadership, wherein the vision is one of achieving moral good and the core values of those of integrity, trust, and moral rectitude. This suggests that moral intelligence is the precursor to ethical leadership. Legislation may lay the foundation for what is lawful, but what is morally intelligent and ethical behavior goes beyond the boundaries of the law. Lennick and Keel define moral intelligence as our mental capacity to determine how universal human principles, like those embodied by the Golden Rule, should be applied to our personal values, goals, and actions. Development of moral reasoning can be examined through Kohlberg's theory of moral development, with 6 stages suggesting a continuum that illustrated moral intelligence is not simply an attempt to avoid punishment or create alignment with law. Individuals in stage 6 choose carefully those ethical principles which are logically comprehensive, universal, and internally consistent. It is in the 6th stage where similarities appear with the previously given definition of moral intelligence. Here the word universal is applied to moral reasoning, guidance by universal ethical principles that all humanity should follow. While some may believe in the concept of moral relativism, where there is no objective right or wrong, moral universalism holds that there are objective right or wrong actions independent of social or personal values or opinions. Objectivity with respect to ethical standards means that some standards do not change when societal consensus shifts. What then are these universal principles? Research revealed core values shared among religions, including a convergence across time, place, and intellectual tradition about certain core virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, temperance, humanity, and transcendence. True ethical courage and integrity are tied to one's certainty that some courses of action are intrinsically wrong and others are intrinsically right. Descriptions provided by the authors in their research are detailed in the full paper and cross-referenced in a table to demonstrate the emergence of three major themes: responsibility, compassion, and integrity that are applied to the case study. Now, let me give you a little background to set the stage for the discussion of moral leadership in this case. On the night of December 11, 1995, Malden Mills in Lawrence, Massachusetts burned to the ground. The destruction of the mill would have been a horrific event in and of itself, but falling just days before Christmas in an area hard hit by declining textile industry and rated 24th among America's poorest cities, it was a blow that could have brought the town to its knees. Producers of Polartec, Malden Mills was a third-generation family owned by the Feuerstein family, with a reputation for strong corporate social responsibility. The business world was nonetheless shocked by his actions following the fire. As Forbes' Great Success Stories describes the unfolding events, Aaron Feuerstein told workers who showed up at the still smoldering site on December 12th that he would rebuild. Then, when an ad appeared in the local newspaper for workers to gather at a meeting at the local high school gym, just 2 days later, rumors were rampant that the 70-year-old had realized the enormity of the task of rebuilding and would say the handwriting was on the wall. The mill was finished. They thought he would take the $300 million in insurance money and move on with his life, either retiring or possibly rebuilding a mill where labor was cheaper. At this point in the story, Feuerstein's moral intelligence becomes clear, not just in words, but in actions. Let's first examine his actions through the two lenses of moral leadership, responsibility, and compassion. Bird and Warder state, in concrete terms, organizational responsibility is associated with making decisions that reduce waste, increase efficiency, and enhance the interest of the organization as a whole. That means any particular objective, no matter how worthy it is by itself, has to be considered in relation to how pursuing this end will benefit the organization as a whole. Lennox and Keel then approach responsibility from two perspectives: responsibility in terms of serving others, and second, accepting responsibility for personal choices through admitting mistakes. If we do not work to serve others, we fail to act as morally intelligent leaders. Serving others is a great way to show integrity and to encourage others to model it. In other words, to lead by example. When we fully embrace responsibility in serving others, the leader naturally moves into compassion. In a 60 Minutes CBS interview, Feuerstein is shown at the December 14th meeting telling his workers that for the next 30 days, all our employees will be paid their full salaries. That gesture alone would have represented compassion and responsibility in the context of accountability, benefiting the organization as a whole, and serving both the employees and the community. However, at the end of the 30 days, he extended the salaries for another 30 days. and then another 30 days at a cost of millions. In the end, Feuerstein continued to pay his employees until almost all of them could be returned to work at Malden Mills. He also kept his word to rebuild in Lawrence, rather than seek lower labor and building costs in other areas of the country or abroad. He stated, "I was proud of the family business, and I wanted to keep that alive, and I wanted that to survive. But I also felt the responsibility for all my employees, to take care of them, to give them jobs." In another interview, Feuerstein stated, "I have a responsibility to the worker. I have an equal responsibility to the community. It would have been unconscionable to put 3,000 people on the streets and deliver a death blow to the city. Maybe on paper our company is worth less to Wall Street, but I can tell you it's worth more." In order to understand his choices, perhaps it is best to further place them in context. Feuerstein relied upon the direction of the Torah, and when asked by Morley Safer of 60 Minutes why he made the choices he did, he responded, "You are not permitted to oppress the working man, because he's poor and he's needy amongst your brethren and amongst the non-Jew in your community." According to Rabbi Shafran, Feuerstein also followed teachings that state, "In a situation where there is no righteous person, try to be a righteous person." Feuerstein said in many interviews, "I think it was a wise business decision, but that isn't why I did it. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Context also requires an understanding of Feuerstein's family history. In his words, 50 years ago, it was normal to have this kind of attitude. Where we're now situated, the first mill was built in 1866, and it was a beautiful structure. In 1867, it was totally destroyed in a devastating fire, exactly what happened to us. Do you think they rebuilt? Of course they rebuilt. That was the value system of the time. I wonder if the proprietors of that mill received the type of publicity I received. I'm sure they did not. What happened is that ethics and value systems we used to have no longer exist. So today, the media are giving me all kinds of credit for it, but I haven't changed. I only did what I thought was right. There are also numerous articles challenging whether Feuerstein's decision demonstrated responsibility in a different context, that of sustaining the mill itself. By February in '96, the team at Malden Mills had 70% of the workers back in place and were producing its famed Polartec fabric at 25% of the pre-fire rate. Yet when Feuerstein continued to pay the remaining workers still out of work at full pay, the questions from the business community regarding the prudence of such actions began. Here's a brief summary of the types of questions that were heard. Wasn't he, in fact, jeopardizing Malden's ability to come back by spending money from which he was getting no practical return? No one will question Feuerstein's good intentions, but there's no line on the balance sheet for loyalty or ethics. An accounting balance sheet may not have those line items, but the employees of Malden Mills appeared determined to repay the kindness and compassion demonstrated to them, illustrating one of the suppositions of Linnick and Keel that acting with moral intelligence makes good business sense. Productivity rose 25% and continued to climb. Additionally, retention of customers and employees was placed at 95%, with quality issues dropping from 6 to 7% pre-fire to 2%. However, as other factors slowly began to enter the picture, such as how to automate the new factory, the cost of replacing equipment, tension between Feuerstein and directors regarding how to proceed, and challenges from the insurance company, things changed. Feuerstein ultimately had to borrow another $100 million to keep the mill operational. In July of '96, Feuerstein demonstrated the second aspect of responsibility, that of responsibility for personal actions. Responsibility is a radical competency because it requires that we accept personal responsibility for everything we do. Feuerstein admitted a profound mistake in attempting to do too much, too soon, in rebuilding, which led to 400 workers learning that their jobs would not likely return. He also took responsibility for failing, along with his management team, in not recognizing the threat from less expensive fleece imported from other countries, while Polytech production facilities were being rebuilt. "We weren't creative and aggressive enough," said Feuerstein. Warm winters cut the demand for Polytech products and earnings fell. By 2000, Feuerstein was in debt for $140 million in loans. The company needed cash to continue operating. The request to borrow more money was met with an unexpected demand from his creditors to file for bankruptcy protection, essentially guaranteeing them to be first in line for repayment if Malden Mills buckled under the weight of its debt. "I begged them on my knees not to go into this chapter," said Feuerstein, who was apparently willing to accept the personal responsibility of paying creditors. Feuerstein possessed self-efficacy for the task of rebuilding, as he had led the company from bankruptcy once before in 1981. In light of Malden Mills' bankruptcy filing in November of 2001, 6 years following the fire, new voices were heard disparaging the previous decisions and level of responsibility of Malden Mills' owner. Statements such as, "It may have been that the desire to take principled action somehow blinded him to thinking long-term, and however admirable Feuerstein's intentions, his actions were ultimately destructive of Malden Mills as an engine of sustainable and flourishing economic community," began appearing in the press. Some writers suggested that keeping the workers on the payroll eventually cost them their jobs, along with the future economic health of the company. Defenders suggested his original motives were enlightened self-interest, because Polytech production required skilled labor. Keeping the workers was as important to him as having a job was to the workers. However, with a weakening economy and increased competition for all of their products, options were limited for saving Malden Mills and the jobs of thousands. The third principle of moral leadership, consistent among a majority of studies on universal values, is the concept of integrity. Integrity includes a variety of synonyms: authenticity, honesty, courage, honesty in communication, and fair treatment, trustworthiness. Integrity is doing the right thing always, while a leader's character cannot become whole and integrated unless it is grounded in a solid infrastructure of moral values. Lennick and Keel provided a 4-part framework for examining this case that encompasses the many aspects of integrity described in the research. The framework included acting consistently with principles, values, and beliefs, telling the truth, standing up for what is right, and keeping promises. While Feuerstein's actions at the time of the fire and during the next year revealed alignment with his moral and ethical principles rooted in his heritage, and authenticity and honesty in every interaction with those around him, from displaced workers to insurance companies, perhaps what is most telling of his integrity were his actions after Malden Mills declared bankruptcy in 2001. When interviewed after the bankruptcy filing and asked if he would have handled the situation in the same manner, he replied, "Yes, it was the right thing to do." Considering Feuerstein in the light of his faith, Rabbi Shafron said, "We are charged with acting not for the moment, but rather for the larger goal, for what is right." Feuerstein never questioned alignment with his principles and values in his actions. After the bankruptcy petition was filed, Feuerstein's plan was to regain full control of his family's business and successfully return it to profitability. A series of articles in the New York Times highlighted the roller coaster the now 76-year-old Feuerstein encountered. Beginning in August 2002, Feuerstein announced Malden Mills would file a plan to emerge from bankruptcy, and he remained at the helm as chairman while the company was restructured. In March of 2003, Feuerstein gave up control of Malden Mills to GE Capital, while he worked to put together a bid to buy back the company. Feuerstein said, "We insist the business must be profitable, otherwise we have nothing. But we also insist a business must have responsibility for its workers, for the community, and the environment. It has a social obligation to figure out a strategy that will permit workers to make a living wage. There's a responsibility to the workforce, to this community. The only way that can be sustained is if I get control." Like any CEO, Feuerstein had the bottom line clearly in sight with his repurchase bid. Recognizing that there are moral consequences to decisions requires more than consideration of the bottom line. His buyback plan would have retained hundreds of jobs in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. The deal proposed by Feuerstein also involved a partnership that would turn 1 million square feet of historic mills at its 20-acre site into 600 low and moderately priced rental apartments. Certainly at 78, Feuerstein did not need the overwhelming task of once again raising Malden Mills from ashes. His courage was summed up during the 60 Minutes interview by a Malden Mills employee who said, "If anybody can pull it off, he can. Some people would walk away. I don't need this aggravation, but he just steps up to the plate time and time again." For strength, Feuerstein returned to the Torah and the story of Joshua, adding, "Moses gives advice to Joshua, be strong and be courageous." God doesn't prescribe a certain course of action. God doesn't tell him anything except to be strong and be courageous. Mayor Michael Sullivan put Feuerstein's plan in perspective for Lawrence, Massachusetts. The community needs the jobs, the affordable housing, and the Feuersteins, who support many local charities they don't take credit for. However, in October of 2004, GE Capital rejected Feuerstein's offer. After rejecting the offer, the bottom line appeared to be the main consideration of the new management of Malden Mills. The CFO projected a substantial part of Malden's operations will move overseas over the next several years. "We'd like to do more business in Asia. We'll do something with the real estate, maybe a sale leaseback." Unfortunately, there is no magical end to this story. Once Feuerstein's offer was rejected, he faded from the news. Those who credited the downfall of Malden Mills to his compassion and responsibility for his employees following the fire, rather than to emerging global competition and environmental factors, were probably surprised to see that the tight reins of GE Capital and sending jobs overseas resulted in another bankruptcy in 2007. Malden Mills no longer exist as Malden Mills, but under Verser Capital Management, the company continued to produce Polartec fabric as Polartec LLC. By 2012, it appeared that Polartec too would be on the sales block. Some final thoughts. While one case study is obviously not generalizable, this article offers integration of various terms used in studies of moral leadership. The analysis discovered 3 moral themes consistent across much of the literature focused on moral leadership: responsibility, integrity, and compassion. This research on these virtues may serve as a springboard to examine cases of other leaders to develop consistency in what is meant by moral intelligence and moral leadership, and how responsibility, integrity, and compassion are applied. This case also offers a teaching opportunity in the classroom to explore true moral intelligence and the results. This case supports the contention of Lennick and Keel that leading with moral intelligence is good business and opens the door to the need for more exploration in this area. As the story unfolded, multiple examples of positive outcomes were found even in the midst of the 2001 bankruptcy, such as none of his customers, manufacturers that used Polartec in their high-end garments, left him. His union workers agreed to a salary freeze until 2003 and gave up paid personal days. Feuerstein retained 95% of his skilled labor. Production increased and quality improved, all positive outcomes based upon his moral leadership. Finally, the case study revealed the need for study of leaders becoming transformative in their organizations because of their moral intelligence and leading their organizations to higher levels of performance. There was obviously a strong connection between the culture of Malden Mills and the moral leadership of Aaron Feuerstein. As Lincoln Keel stated, moral intelligence is not just important to effective leadership. It is also the central intelligence for all humans. It directs our other forms of intelligence to do something worthwhile. This case study demonstrates that a leader with strong moral intelligence does not waver in making the right decisions, even at great personal cost. Under the most trying of circumstances, Feuerstein responded with responsibility, compassion, and integrity. His people were always at the forefront of his decisions. Even when the results achieved were less than anticipated and hoped for, his actions were always consistent with his moral compass. While emotional and social intelligence are widely studied in the field of leadership today, a glance at the headlines reveals the need for a type of intelligence that would guide leaders to make more ethical decisions as moral leaders.